You're listening to Unmuted Love. Hi there, I'm C. Eshelman, and with 35 years as a marriage and family therapist and 25 years as a parent of 2 children I brought home from the foster care system, I want to welcome you here to Unmuted Love Podcast, the one place where nothing is off limits to say out loud about parenting children from difficult beginnings.
Stop for a minute, stop and breathe for a minute, long it over your head, try to listen instead, won't you? Think for a minute, who you want to be for a minute, don't get over your head, you're like everyone else, aren't you?
Sometimes it's real sweet around here, and sometimes it ain't so pretty, because this is 100% Unmuted Love. So let's go.
You'll be just
Hey parents, this is C. Get the help you need to end destructive and chaotic behavior in your home while parenting children from difficult beginnings. I know you need help, and the Love Plus parenting model actually works. I'm inviting you to work with me personally for 6 months in my virtual therapeutic parent program, and I guarantee you results, or 100% of your investment back. How is that for a blue ribbon deal? I'm looking forward to working with you. See you on the inside. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Unmuted Love. I'm here today with Kristine Binderup. Did I say that right, Kristine?
Yes.
Do you want to be called Kristine or Kristi?
Kristi is fine.
Okay. Well, I'm here with Kristi, and we're here to talk about how her journey got her here. She's the grandmother of a child who comes from difficult beginnings. And I'm not going to tell her story for her. I'm going to allow you to hear it from her. I'm going to ask her some questions later. So, Kristi, would you talk to me a little bit about what happened to you and what happened to get you to this place? I always ask that question, what happened to you? Because I think that's really important for people to understand that things happen to us and we change because of that. So I would love to hear you talk about it. I'm so grateful that you're willing to share your story here. And as you have said before this started, that the more you share, the more other people can heal. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you. You're welcome. I was a child from challenging beginnings as well. My parents experienced domestic violence, separation, divorce. I grew up with my dad, who was a marijuana grower in the 70s and 80s, and that there was a lot of abuse. There was a lot of fear of police and stuff like that. As a teenager, I moved back and lived with my mom, and we had a challenging relationship because of the break and separation that we had. We didn't understand each other. I had my children very young. My daughter was born when I was 18. I left home at 17, had my daughter at 18, moved all over the country, had my son with another partner at the age of 21. Both of my partners were domestically violent. And when my daughter was 6 and my son was 2.5, we left that abusive relationship and I struck out on my own, became a single mom. I got support from my mom and my dad, therapy and need. We learned to work together. My life drastically changed. But in the meantime, my children had experienced, my daughter had experienced 6 years of domestic violence and challenging beginning, including myself doing things that I regret and I'm ashamed of, a more abusive or more punitive parenting, like spanking and stuff like that, even though consciously I didn't want to do it that way. And I ended up trying to change my life in a lot of ways through the years that followed when I was as a single mom. And so I started school, I got a job, I kind of pull myself up by my bootstraps and have a lot of pride in that. However, I continued to struggle as a parent, even though I actually became a parent trainer. And what's interesting about that is I fully believe in the training techniques, and I was able to understand where parents were coming from and be a really great resource and actually sometimes implement that in my own children, except for when I became dysregulated. So fast forward, my daughter had her daughter when she was 18. She actually did really great during her pregnancy and through her first year. She did struggle with a lot of mental health issues. I feel like during pregnancy, I don't know what it was, but she was kind of like a different person. So maybe the hormones and stuff were in a place where she was really in a good place. And she did really, really well until about 8 months after my granddaughter was 8 months old and she started struggling again. And she actually became addicted to meth. And it just kind of went downhill from there. And by the time my granddaughter was 3 years old, almost four, she came to live with me because of a very serious, violent situation that happened that she witnessed and experienced with her mom and her mom's partner at the time. And then my daughter had various levels of interaction, from zero interaction for I think about a year and a half to visitation. And then in 2020, she lived with us during the pandemic. And when that was lifted, she went back to being homeless and living on her own with a partner who was also domestically violent. And she ultimately ended up succeeding at suicide after multiple attempts throughout her life in August of 2020, which of course then became this huge thing of grief for my granddaughter and I, that we started going on our journey. We were already in therapy. We were already trying to do all the things that we could do. And I honestly dealt with my grief by becoming a workaholic. And so I essentially emotionally abandoned my granddaughter in her hour of need. I mean, of course, I was there and I was doing all the things, but I wasn't actually there for her. And so after a year of that, she kind of fell apart and she became the identified patient and was in and out of hospitals at the age of 7. So then I had to, I had to realize, like, I have to do something really different. Traditional parenting's not working. I'm struggling. And I was actually to the point of thinking in my head, I'm not the right person for this. I can't do this. I'm not good for her. I'm not the right thing. And thinking of putting her in the foster care system because I just felt like I couldn't do right by her. I couldn't, I had all the shame from my own daughter and the outcome of that. I had all the shame from my own upbringing and what was happening. And it was just like muddling our whole relationship. And my very good friend was part of the Love Matters Parenting Society. And she said, it's for adoptive parents, but it might be something that could really help you. And so I looked into it and I just joined. I feel like that has literally saved my granddaughter and my life, literally, both emotionally, but also like literally, because my granddaughter struggles with feelings of suicide and wanting to be dead and stuff like that. And I have also, honestly. And this parenting in a therapeutic manner is a very hard thing to do, but it is getting results that are way better than what I've ever experienced in all the hundreds of other positive parenting and otherwise parenting things that I do. So that's kind of our story that brings us to where we are now.
Wow, Kristi, that is really an incredible history. When I hear it all in a line like that, it says a lot. It gives testament to epigenetics, right? Like what starts out as domestic violence continues in your relationship and then in your daughter's relationships. And then when you get your granddaughter, the suicidality from your daughter and even your own then comes up again in your granddaughter. It's must be so painful to see that, to tell your story and realize how hard it is to escape these well-ingrained patterns that are traumatic, right? The trauma imprints in our brains, they don't just go away, they repeat generation after generation. I know that's painful for you. I can't really imagine how it feels to have a child succeed at suicide and then to have her child really struggle with it alongside you. It's a lot. I think you're amazing that you are standing tall the way you are, that you go to work every day. You're a parent child educator, right? You're a professional person in this field and you do that every day on top of all this history, which is so amazing to me. You're like one of my heroes. I hope you know that. I'll call you a shero. Shiro, for just how open you are and how willing you are to tell your story. I mean, I think that's lovely. Thank you for saying that. I wonder if you had some things to do differently, where you would start that in your process. I mean, could you have done it differently? What I often say is that when you know better, you do better. Did you know better, but you still couldn't do better? That's what I'm thinking I'm hearing a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like when my children were younger and I was moving from domestic violence, to wanting to find parents, that's actually how I got into early childhood education, is I wanted a better way. I knew what I didn't want. I just didn't know what the alternative was. And, at that time, in that age, that was when timeout became really, really popular. And I just could not do timeout. Like, it didn't work. I had very defiant children. I feel like timeout is a really great method for children who are very complacent and and willing to sit there quietly, but that doesn't run in my family apparently. So I was always trying to find something new. And when I try, I've done everything from, PET to, I mean, like I probably every single positive parenting program I've tried out the techniques, and they probably would have worked, except for what I feel like on my own journey, my own mental health journey, is that when I become dysregulated, I don't parent anymore. I become a little kid with them in a fight. So we're like two little kids fighting over a truck, or the who gets to ride the bicycle. And so I literally lose my ability to be an adult in that moment and become like a little kid.
Yeah, so that says a lot about what trauma does to you, right? That
Mm-hmm.
your unfinished trauma work shows up when you're trying to parent probably your daughter originally, and then your son, and now your granddaughter, right? It just persists. And
Yes.
if you don't do your own trauma work, or if you try but you don't complete it, or if it's not the right kind of trauma work, you might know your story, but if you're not doing the work to heal, it ends up showing up in your parenting. And it repeats, and it's almost like it's impossible to stop if you don't have that awareness, and then you put a lot of intention on changing the outcome of your life.
Very much so. That's where I get stuck. And like I've had years and years of therapy, but I struggle in the moment to do the technique or the task that I would like to do.
You were saying that you have had a ton of therapy. So what is it now that is helping you when you know better, you are actually doing better? What's different? If you've been through every single parenting program, even the ones for kids who've experienced trauma, what is different now?
It's the work that I'm doing on myself. In the first part of the Love Matters Parenting Society, we start with us as adults and as humans. That's where we are first, because we're an individual first. And the coherent narrative is huge. That peels back a lot of layers. And then the neurosculpting that we do really helps. And like this morning, for example, I was struggling. I was getting upset. I went for a little walk, and during the walk I was like, okay, so sometimes I have a hard time identifying my agenda. So my favorite technique right now is to stop, drop my agenda, breathe, and just listen. But it's really hard to do that when I'm not able to know what my agenda was. And so I'm walking and walking. I'm mad. So I'm walking fast, and I'm thinking, my agenda is she needs to get this work done, but she's having a hard time. If her lid is flipped, she can't do the work. But it has to be done today. And so that's my agenda. My agenda is getting her to do the work. But then when I dug deeper, I realized the agenda really had to do with me, because it had to do with me having anxiety about not getting my work done as a kid, and remembering that anxiety of coming into the classroom without having my work done, and that stress. And I didn't have a lot of support around doing homework. So it really was about me. I wanted her to complete these tasks because I had anxiety about turning something into the teacher that wasn't complete. And she's on a different journey. And right now, she's to get through the day regulated is a hard task in this time right now. And so once I realized that agenda was about me, I was able to go in and just listen and suggest that we do something else. And even suggest, it didn't necessarily go well, but I did suggest that we do something else that helped, like regulate ourselves. Or I was like, let's use one of the skills we would use to like calm down and get ourselves into the zone of regulation. And it did actually end up working, because she got mad at me at first, but then she went and took a bath, and now she's been like doodling around doing other things. She's not doing the work, but that's okay. I let go of that. That agenda is over. I let go of that agenda, and now it's about building that relationship, and having a positive relationship is more important than the work that gets done. I have no concerns about her academic abilities. I have a lot of concerns about her ability to connect with people and build that relationship and have a secure attachment and create a felt safety in the home for me and for her. And the other piece that I know I need to do, and I just need to keep doing and doing just to maintain a level to stay into my zone of regulation, is self-care. Like the little self-care. Like before I wake up, I swing my feet over the bed and I kind of do a little check-in, like how am I feeling? How did I sleep? Do I have any aches and pains? Like, can I let them go? And then I do tapping a lot. I do meditation. my mind races a lot. So I do tapping into meditation. That really helps me, and then of course the exercise and choosing good food to eat
Right.
and stuff like that. So
Well, you're doing a lot of things, I can tell, to help yourself regulate, and all those are really important. The thing that's so insightful to me that you see that you have to work on yourself, and you see how in the moment it's really not about your child, right? It's about you. It's hard when you're a parent to realize that what's in front of you isn't the problem, right? That what's inside you is the problem. And I really love that you have decided to focus on your agenda, because you're right. I mean, we do talk about stop, drop your agenda, breathe, or get a sip of water, or take a walk, or whatever to calm down, to regulate, not to calm down necessarily, but just to get back into the window of tolerance for feelings. But you have decided to focus on your agenda because it's hard for you to see your agenda. And you're one of the few parents I know who realize that their agenda is the actual problem. Because parents often think, well, they have to go to school, they have to get their shoes on, they have to do this. And then my question always is, why do they have to right now? I mean, is it an emergency that they go to school today? Is it an emergency they get this done right now? Why are we making everything an emergency? And it's because of our agenda, right? And our agenda is not always just what's on the surface, like going to school. What we're really doing is saying, you have to go to school because I want you to be able to graduate from high school and leave home and go to college and do all these things, right? It's like, well, you're 11 years old and I'm already preparing you for college. So like in a parent's agenda is not just right in front of them, right? It's like years and years and years long, and it scares us, right? And so we're like cracking the whip behind our kids to get their shoes on because we're worried about
yes,
college.
that's
It's
so
kind of
true. And it also about manners, like a lot of times about manners. And I bump up against my mom and my son because, they want a calm, respectful child, which she can be when she's regulated. She's very much a sweetheart when she's regulated. People love her so much, and I get so many compliments when she's regulated, but you can't expect that when she's dysregulated. And so I even had the story in my head that, oh, like she's going to end up just like her mom, and on and on and on. And I've been able to let go of a lot of that and a lot of shame also, because everybody has their own trajectory. And yes, I did things that I'm not proud of that influence that trajectory, but also I can't undo it at this point. So I've let go of a lot of that shame and blame on myself. It actually makes my life easier because I'm able to stay regulated, because she's not getting her shoes on. Oh my God, she's going to become a drug addict and kill herself, which it would go there. And that, like, if you think consciously, that is crazy. That's like loony bin crazy to think that, because you're not putting your shoes on, or because you're not going to school today, or because you said something in a rude way, you're going to end up in a certain place later on.
right. Some serious catastrophizing is in
Yes.
the minds of most parents, right? It's like a catastrophe, especially if you have kids from difficult beginnings, because
Mhm.
they've been harmed so much that their behavior, their communication is through behavior. And so it's so much behavior that it's really hard to not catastrophize. Like, this is going to keep going on and on and on until what's going to happen to you, right? And then it's like a crash. But that isn't really the truth either. What I know,
Mm.
having worked in this field for so long and having had kids go through therapy with me or the parents and then come back, they love to come back after they're like 25. They come back and say hi to me. And I'm like, well, look at you, and they're often wearing some kind of uniform, or they're all dressed up in their work clothes, and they're just coming in to show me really who they are. I mean, they don't say that. They say they're coming to see me, but I know they're not. I know they're coming to show me that they made it. And that
Mhm.
is incredible to me, right? I mean, that's how come I know I can say with pretty clear confidence that you just have to hang on to them, not control them, but just love them. Love
Mhm.
them through these hard places, right? Because most of them will get to the other side. Some of them won't. Your daughter is an example of that. She
Mhm.
didn't make it to the other side for other reasons, which we can't always change. And
Mhm.
clearly, we can try as hard as we like, but trauma is trauma is trauma. And
Yeah,
that's
exactly. And that was her path, maybe, for whatever reason. And I wish I could change it, but I can't. I can't go back. And yeah, we're not there. We
yeah,
don't control other people's trajectory.
that's right. We don't. We can influence, but we can't control it. And
Yeah.
understanding that, I think parents are pretty big control freaks when it comes to that catastrophizing and worrying about the future for our kids. And it's actually not helpful, right? Worrying about the future by controlling the present doesn't actually impact the future
Mhm.
in a positive way at all.
Yeah, that I mean, if I think back of parenting my daughter through her teen years, that's a lot of what I did. I was trying to control what she did in the moment to avoid the outcome that ended up, which I never imagined that outcome, but like the drugs, like I was trying to control everything to make sure she wouldn't do drugs. And I mean, like, and most parents are going to do that, but it's going to happen. And I don't do drugs. I don't hang out with people who drugs. And yet my daughter became a meth addict for whatever need it gave her. I mean, I think a lot of ways it was self-medication,
Right.
but also, I also know that because I have a different perspective, because I know that I'm a child from challenging beginnings and I've made it, most people looking at my life, I hold a high level job and a, stable program. I take care of my house and my car and, I live a basically sound life. They would never know where I come from unless I share my story. And that's partly why I want to share my story, because I want to help uplift other people as well, because it really helps. But I do have to say that, like, all the years and years of therapy, doing my coherent narrative, which nobody ever talked about in all the therapy that I've done, all the talk therapy, we never did a coherent narrative. And then going back and neurosculpting, which I've done in different ways, because I did do EMDR and I've done other neurosculpting. I mean, they're neurosculpting, but they weren't called neurosculpting necessarily. But I really feel like going back and like even today, I could go back to that child who stood in front of the class not having their homework, or who had to sit at their desk kind of hiding while everybody else took out their homework and corrected it. I could go back to that child and I could give her a big hug and say, you know what, you're okay. You're going to end up with a master's degree in education and you'll be teaching kids and you're going to be fine. You're going to have a teacher's credential someday. You're going to be fine.
Yeah, wouldn't that be so great? I mean, if that had happened back then, but yes, in neurosculpting, you can go back and have that conversation and instill in the part of you that's still little some faith that she's going to grow up and be okay, because you
Yeah.
are. You have
Yeah.
grown, you are okay. Let me just ask you, as we're kind of coming to a close, if you could help another parent who maybe knows, well, clearly knows that their child has had trauma, and who maybe thinks that their trauma is just in the past and isn't really affecting them, what would you say? How would you help them? What would you say that might make more sense than a therapist telling them? Because I'm a therapist and I tell people that all the time. They're just like, yeah, 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 it's fine.
I would probably say that if you've had any kind of trauma in your life, it's in layers. There's layers and layers. So even though you think that you've dealt with it, especially when you're working with children from challenging beginning, they are going to bring up layers and layers of that trauma. You wouldn't say that having anxiety about turning in papers is a trauma necessarily. I'm not like a traumatized thing, but it was something that came up to me that was affecting my relationship with, my girl.
Mhm.
And then I had to deal with it. So, I mean, it doesn't even have to be like big trauma. It could just be something you're worried about or stressed about, but it comes in layers. There's layers and layers. Like, I think I'm like, oh, I got all this work done. And then, oh, there's another one. There's some more.
Right?
All right, let's get to that. And then just forgiveness and self care. Having forgiven myself in the 2 years of this work has been the biggest support to being able to be present and real and work on my attachment style, with my kid. I just happen to take extra work, just like some people have to take medicine or some people have to take vitamins to be at a normal level. I have to do extra things to help myself be in my zone of calm.
So, I really appreciate your saying what you said at the start, where, it doesn't have to be trauma that impacts how you parent your kids, because that is probably one of the roadblocks that I have when I'm talking to parents, is that I tend to think of everything as trauma, and that I know, despite what I know, and that's that most people don't think of everything as trauma. And so I probably need to just name it something else. I mean, I have started saying big T and small t trauma, but even small t, I mean, what you're describing, being anxious, going to school without your homework done, is not in and of itself traumatic,
Yeah.
but it was impressive, right? Impress something on you. that keeps showing up here and makes it hard for you to allow your granddaughter to have her own trajectory. I think that's probably really good. I'm trying to I guess it's what happened to you, the way I started, it's like, what happened to you? And it's not like it's not always bad what happened to you, it just happened to you and it impacted you. I need to reframe that. I need to start talking about that differently because I do get a lot of people saying, "Well, I don't have any trauma." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, but I'm pretty sure that if you didn't have any trauma, you wouldn't be yelling at your children, or you wouldn't be finding that you're having a hard time loving your children, or, like, I'm pretty sure that if you didn't have any of that, but what they had was just their lives and they never saw it as trauma."
And that's the interesting thing about trauma is that, 5 people could experience the same traumatic event, a car crash or seeing a shooting in the street and have completely different levels of trauma or reaction to it, depending on so many factors, like not, just their thing. But yeah, if you take like the stress of showing up, the anxiety, that was not trauma. I wouldn't even call it little trauma. It was just something that happened that I had to live through. And obviously it had no effect on my life. I'm not afraid to turn in papers. It really just showed up as, oh my goodness, she's going to have that feeling of not having her homework turned up. Oh my goodness, like, oh, I don't want her to have that. I want to protect her from that. And it's really not that big of a deal. If she doesn't care about it, or if she does, she has to decide for herself what her level of anxiety around that is. Like, as a human being, you either care about something or you don't. And if you don't, you can't make somebody care. It's not important to them.
That moment it's not. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, Kristi, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy life, I know, and coming here to talk about this with me. I love hearing the voices of parents here because a lot of times people don't tell the real story. They don't talk deeply enough. And I just appreciate you so much. And also, I value you so much. Someone in the membership today, I'm just not gonna say their name, but someone in the membership today said that you're teaching her.
Aw.
You're teaching her how to focus on her regulation and on how she thinks about things. I love that, right? I love that in the Love Matters Parenting Society, parents teach parents.
Yeah.
Lovely, right? It's a beautiful thing. It's nice to have a community of people who get you, but it's also just really great to learn from people who are in the thick of it, right? In the muck, and they are trying as hard as you are to change it. It's very hard to change neural pathways, and everybody in this group is working hard on that for sure.
The memberships are I think also what made a huge difference because I brought some things that I was incredibly ashamed of. And I thought for sure, like when I started, I had said, like, oh, these are the parents that should be having my kid. Like, these are the parents that should be raising my kid. They got it together. But yet I braved, I took a deep breath. I shared things that I thought for sure were going to get me kicked out of the group. Nobody would want to talk to me anymore. And instead they're like, yep, been there, done that, had that happen. Yep, I understand. And so that's how I was able to alleviate a lot of the shame that I was holding on to also. Definitely takes a village. And I think it takes a couple villages to raise children from challenging beginnings.
I do too. Well, I'm glad you have the village you have inside and outside, right? Inside the community here, but also outside. Thank you for coming today. And I'll see you on the inside of Love Matters Parenting at another time.
Thanks. Love you. Have a great day.
I love you
Stop
too.
for a minute.
Bye-bye.
Stop and breathe for a minute. Long it over your head. Try to listen instead, won't you? Think for a minute who you want to be for a minute. Don't get over your head. You're like everyone else, aren't you? You could gain from being a bit nicer. Know when to talk and when to shut your mouth.
The Unmuted Love podcast is hosted by me, C. Eshelman, attachment and trauma specialist at the Attach Place in Sacramento, California. Our podcast producer is the amazing Saya Clark, and our theme song is Nicer by Houses on the Hill, licensed through Epidemic Sound. Thank you for being such loyal listeners here on Unmuted Love. I'll see you all next week.
You'll be just fine.